Good evening and welcome to the June 30th Policy Subcommittee meeting of the Brockton School Committee. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and state of emergency, on March 12, 2020, Governor Baker issued an executive order temporarily suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GL Chapter 30A, Section 20. Pursuant to the order, public bodies are temporarily relieved from the open meeting law's requirement that meetings be held in public places, open and physically accessible to the public, so long as measures are taken to ensure the public's access to the body's deliberations through adequate alternative means. This meeting will be held and will be accessible to the public via Brockton Community Access, Brockton Public Schools website, www.bpsma.org, YouTube, and Comcast Channel 12. The public can access this meeting via this link, www.youtube.com/TheBrocktonChannels. First order of business will be to call the roll to meet under the revised open meeting law. Mayor Sullivan.
Yes.
And the vice chair is a yes. Ms. Asak sends her regrets this evening. Ms. Mendez.
Yes.
Mr. Minicheillo. Okay. Mr. Rodriguez. Let's see. Okay, I don't see him. Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
All right. And then next we'll do a roll call to establish a quorum. Mayor Sullivan.
Yes.
And D'Agostino is a yes. Ms. Asak is not with us. Mrs. Mendez.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Minicheillo. Mr. Rodriguez. Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
All right. All right, so first, I do want to thank the members of the committee that were able to attend the budget hearing at City Hall. We had Ms. Asak, myself, Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Mendez, and Mr. Rodriguez were all there. We appreciate the superintendent did a great job presenting the budget. The council, asked some good questions and provided good feedback, and several members of the council had some kind words for the committee. So I did want to share that, both some on Facebook after the fact, and I believe Councilor Farwell, and then Councilors Ianieri and Nicastro also had some kind words to share with the committee about their appreciation of all of our efforts. So I did want to bring that and pass that along to everybody. The agenda for tonight's policy subcommittee meeting starts with a review of the student and parent handbooks. The second item is possible amendments due to COVID-19 reopening guidelines from DESE, discussion about personal protective equipment for reopening. Then we have a policy revision for caregivers, and then any other business that needs to come before the committee. On the handbooks, my understanding is Mrs. Wolder will be presenting that, but Superintendent Thomas, did you want to weigh in on that at all before we got started?
Yeah, Sharon spent a lot of time. She gets the feedback from our principals at every level. As you know, we have handbooks, elementary, middle school, a Brockton High handbook, a handbook for the Edison Academy, a handbook for the Frederick Douglass Academy, a handbook for the Champion High School, and also a separate handbook for the Huntington Therapeutic Day School. So there are a lot of handbooks to go through. A lot of the language is the same, but obviously some of it is, it pertains to the individual school. So I want to thank Sharon. She worked with our attorney, Caitlin Leach, to make sure that we have all our updates legally that we need. Every year there are different legal cases that settle. There's different notices that come out. we have to update our handbooks and make sure it's legally sound and in compliance with the law. Sharon also went through and spent a lot of time on the dress code. The dress code, a lot of things have been in the dress code for several years, probably some of them 30, 40 years. Some of the items that were listed that were not able to be worn are racially or culturally insensitive, so those were removed. But the dress code does continue to state clearly that a student's dress cannot interrupt the educational process for others. So I appreciate with Sharon, the principals and the team of people that worked with her, but also Attorney Caitlin Leach for how much time it takes to put the handbooks together. And obviously, you know how important they are to the district. And not only to protect the district, but to protect our students and staff as well. So I'll let Sharon jump in and just talk about that process, and then we will be looking for a vote of approval. So we're going to have to start to get these translated, and so we can get them off to the printer, and then I can talk about the possible amendments in the next agenda item.
Good evening. Normally you would have been looking at this, at all of them, actually, all of the handbooks probably in April. And obviously because of our closure due to COVID-19, there were some things that have taken longer to get them to you than what is typical. And so tonight's vote will help us move the process of getting everything translated along. Ultimately, as Mike pointed out, there were some minor changes. Some of them you'll see are just related to start and end times or the calendars. You'll see some other things in there that are very specific to the legal language that we're required to make sure that we have in the books. For example, the acceptable use policy with the inclusion of information about temporary records. We added that piece in as it was designed by our attorneys. Brockton High School had the most changes to the handbook, which you notice from the changes that we've sent to you, all of which have been vetted with the principal and the deans of the school. And obviously with our attorney to add specific language that supports what we are legally responsible for saying and doing. And some of the other handbooks, you see fewer changes, but all are reflective of some of the most updated changes we need to make. And as Mike said, we are working on an addendum to the book that will come out the end of the year that addresses some of our COVID-19 related changes and requirements, and a remote learning plan that we may or may not need moving forward. I don't know if people have specific questions about any of the items, but it would be easier to do it that way rather than try to read them all to you.
Sharon, could you, the superintendent mentioned that there was some dress code related changes. Are those in this edition, or were those, or is he talking about previous changes we made in previous years?
So we've made changes to dress code a couple of times over the years, but there was some specific language related to things that people wear on their hair or cover their head with that are very specific to culture. And the language used in the handbook identifies culture, which, you know, it could easily be considered profiling or just insensitive in general, and needed to be removed.
Okay, so we've made those adjustments in all
Those
these
adjustments
handbooks this year.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
We've made those
great.
adjustments.
Excellent. Any other questions from the members of the committee? I mean, I know it's tough for you to do this in this kind of Zoom mode without, you know, everything, you know, being in person. I get that. Is there anything that is particularly noteworthy that you know, could point out to us? I mean, we talked about the dress code. Is there anything else like that that's, you know, I mean, anything, you know, discipline wise or any of those types of issues? Those are kind of the hot button things that come up often. Were there any changes to any of that?
For discipline, for the most part, because of Chapter 222 and all of the changes we've made over the past few years to really address the laws with discipline, most of it stays pretty. It stays pretty much stable in terms of language and the treatment of students. There were a couple of areas in the handbook you'll see there were some deletions, but it was simply because we were repetitive. It was mentioned in multiple places within the handbook, and so where there was repetition, it was removed. So you'll see that it'll say that it was moved or changed as a result of us repeating ourselves at various points in the handbook. So those things have been taken out. Most of the schools wanted to maintain the records or the handbooks as they were. One of the areas that we did make a change to was on absenteeism and the requirement for a doctor's note. And in light of some of the issues that we will have and we anticipate having with students staying home for days or periods of time where they will not see a doctor, that was taken out of the book as well.
Okay.
There will be
All right.
obviously communication with parents and all of the other steps that we take when a child is absent. All of those steps will remain the same, but the required documentation to be seen by a doctor if you're absent, that's been taken out.
Okay. All right, good. And that may also coincide with, I know sometimes I've gotten calls, and I suspect I'm not the only one. And I don't remember, forgive me if we've already addressed this, where, especially at the high school, I think there were automatic failures for unexcused absences. Is that still in here, or have we addressed that?
So the attendance policy did not
There you go.
change.
Okay.
The automatic failure policy that has been in place for several years has not changed. However, what people, when they're calling or if there are questions, that's always something that should be referred back to the dean or the principal, because there are waivers that students can get. So there are some things, again, kids are not gonna be going to the doctor over and over and over to get notes. But the absences should be addressed. And if it is something where someone was sick and so they stayed home a few days to make sure everyone was safe, those are absences that can be waived. And so the waiver policy is still in the handbook and still very much in place for any unexcused absences. And that will be something that we will need to take into consideration moving forward, because if we're asking people to, at some point, maybe quarantine for multiple days, we have to be prepared to not hold those absences against kids in any way. And if they choose to do it because they think it's keeping people safe, then we need to be flexible and reasonable about that as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I have to say that the couple of times that I've called Dr. Murray about an issue that was brought to me, they were, you know, he was very reasonable about it and very helpful about it. So, you know, I don't think it's, I think to your point, the waivers are available and the policy is, you know, used very reasonably. So, any other comments from anybody else? Questions?
Hi, Sharon. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Any areas or specifics where you are a little bit concerned, where we had to make modifications in order to comply with some recent changes in the law that you think you know, the district needs to keep sort of an eye at in order to make sure that you know, things don't get out of hand in any certain area or specifics? I mean, my only concern with some things, some changes, is that, you know, we get to a point where in some instances a few can disrupt the you know, the education of a lot of people. if in fact, out of control conduct is not tolerated, but given a little more leeway in terms of allowing it to root and really disrupt the education. So any spots where you think we really think there should be some eyes watching how things resolve themselves over the year?
So what I would say to that is when the law changed, it changed the way discipline can be handled in school systems, that's for sure. Where the work of the district is going to be, and we know it for many reasons, is a lot of the behaviors are trauma related or social emotional development related. And so a lot of the work that is being done in terms of social emotional learning and supports are going to need to be increased, especially now, because you're going to have pretty much every child returning to school with some level of trauma because of COVID, because of the racial and civil unrest in our country, and just because of life circumstances for many of them. And so the punitive approach to addressing some of those behaviors is ineffective. And I think that's what the law recognized years ago. And we have to be able to develop some protocols and some supports so that we're more prepared to address those behaviors. Now, in cases where, a crime is committed or someone is victimized, obviously our policies address that, and every child has a right to due process, and our policies very clearly state that. And we also have consequences for behaviors outlined within our handbooks. And so all of that still exists. Some of the concerns that people are expressing is the amount of trauma our children have suffered as a result of these last 3.5 months is of concern. And when they return to school, those things are going to play out, and we're going to see that. And we have to be prepared to deal with that, and not begin with a punishment approach, but definitely with a social emotional lens and that kind of support as much as possible first.
Well,
Not sure if that answered what.
no, it certainly does. I mean, I hear you loud and clear. The tricky part in that is going to be obviously doing that and not having the proper resources to be able to add to those types of instructors and/or counselors and support for the kids. Doing so in an environment that we're all unfortunately going to have, instead of the opposite, where we were going to be funded due to the new law, as opposed to what we're ending up with this year. So, yep, loud and clear. Got the message. Just hopefully we have the funding in order to make that work. I couldn't agree more with you. So, thank you, Sharon.
Yep. And as you know, when we thought money was coming in, you all had agreed to add 13 more school adjustment counselors to our district, because before all of this, we knew we needed to take a more social emotional approach to address some of the behaviors and concerns that we have. And so to not be able to do that and have our concerns, magnified because of recent conditions and situations in our country, it does make it more challenging. And that means we have to really do a lot to support the teachers who are going to be there, the counselors, everyone, in some strategies that will hopefully help to ease kids back into a school environment, allow them to have that time to really reconnect to school and have a chance to let us understand what they've experienced before we just jump into now it's time to pick up with academics, because many of them won't come in ready to learn. They'll come in ready to be supported.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I just hope that, again, it's the same old story. Every year we end up having to cut. And this was the year that we were all hopeful that we weren't going to be cutting. We're going to add, like you said, we did want to add those positions. I mean, we saw the need. And now, like you said, with the current set of circumstances, there's, 10 times the need that we had, a year ago, so it's going to be an interesting start of the year, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon. Good to hear from you.
Thank you.
Any other, Mr. Sullivan, the floor is yours.
I'd like to make a motion if I could.
Could I just ask if we have any other comment before you do that?
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind. Any other members of the committee want to comment before Mr. Sullivan makes a motion? All right, no other comment by all means.
The motion is to accept as written all of the Brockton Public Schools handbooks for the years 2020 and 2021.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
Okay. All right, motion on the floor, properly seconded. One last call for any comments on the motion? All right, seeing none, I'll call the roll. Mayor Sullivan.
Yes.
D'Agostino is a yes. Ms. Asak is not with us. Mrs. Mendez.
Yes.
Mr. Minicheillo.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Motion carries. Handbooks are approved. All right.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sharon, for your time and your work on this. I know it's a lot of time and a lot of work. We really appreciate it. Okay, the next item, I believe the superintendent was going to run with this, possible amendments to the handbooks due to COVID-19. Superintendent Thomas, the floor is yours.
So we're working now, we'll continue to work with our attorneys with the initial guidance that has come out from the Department of Education concerning the return to school in the fall. So we will have to build an addendum using those guidelines. We will wait a few more weeks because there is going to be guidelines coming out around transportation, extracurricular activities. So before and after school programs, as well as sports, band, all extracurricular activities. So that guidance will probably be out within the next 2 weeks. So we'll wait to see what that is. This is initial guidance from the state. I'm sure by August 1st, there'll be more concrete guidance that is pretty much going to be decided on and stay the same. So we'll come up with an addendum to the handbook. As you know, the initial guidance is calling for students in grades 2 through 12 to wear masks, as well as staff as well. So these are the things we're going to have to put in: hand washing, hand sanitizer, the amount of mask breaks that students are going to need to get along with staff. So there's and then obviously what transportation is going to look like with social distancing. So, and it could change obviously our arrival and dismissal policy. So what we want to do is capture all that and an addendum to the handbook, so parents and staff and everybody is clear on what the expectations are for anything related to returning to school around the COVID-19 guidelines. So we probably expect to, near the end of July, have a draft of that for you. And then obviously when we get into August, look to vet that out and then get it approved probably at our meeting in August. So I just wanted to lay that out for you, that even though we're approving the handbooks for the 2020-21 school year, it's important to note that we will be bringing an addendum forward once the guidelines become more concrete.
Any questions on that agenda item for the superintendent? Okay. Oh, Mrs.
Sorry.
Mendez, go ahead.
Question. I think you're gonna probably touch on it on PPE for reopening, but for second and 12th graders, if they have to wear masks, let's say there's a student that refuses, have we yet thought about what would happen if the student refuses to not wear the mask? Like you mentioned breaks, but like not wearing it at all?
Yeah, they talked about, there was a call with Commissioner Riley today, and that was discussed. where obviously if that's the case, there's obviously going to be medical reasons why a student can't wear a mask, or there could be other reasons that we do not know of. So we're going to have to approach each one of those case by case, obviously for medical reasons. And if a student, just refuses to wear the mask, that's going to be something that we'll obviously look for guidance when we're putting this addendum together from our attorneys. I'm sure that's going to be something that all districts are going to want some guidance from our attorneys to see, how we deal with that situation. But again, I think, Cynthia, it's going to be dealt by case, depending on the needs of the child, depending on any social and emotional issues. I just think that obviously we have to deal with it case by case, but more of a supportive and delicate nature. So we're making sure and find out the reasons why. But again, we also have to protect all the other students and staff in the building. So that has to also be taken into consideration. So I'm sure that we'll have much more guidance around that and much more advice from our attorneys as well as we get closer to putting this addendum together near the end of the month, near the end of July.
Okay, because my only concern would be kind of that matter of policing, when kids would get in trouble of not masking, and that bringing more trauma, especially with everything going on. So just thinking of ways where you said case by case and trying to be more supportive than disciplinary, that's great. But just like really thinking about, especially in the high school level per se, and how kids respond to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's gonna, and that's an issue that needs to stay obviously with the student, the parent, and the assistant dean, the dean, and obviously we get the counselors involved. And again, if it's beyond a medical issue, but I think it obviously has to be taken case by case to see what the actual underlying issues are. And then we have to see, as obviously in the protection of all the other, the health and safety of everybody else in the building as well. So, but that those are situations we're going to have to be ready to deal with.
Great. Okay, anyone else? All right.
The other thing I wanted to add about that is that the guidance does not, and we looked into this because we've been exploring, again, trying to predict what was coming out for guidance, because there's early indication had that we were going to have to take every student's temperature when they came in. So we were looking at scanners to do that. That is not in the initial guidance. So at this time, we are not looking to purchase the large scale scanners that students walk through to have their temperature taken. That's right now off the table. However, we will have the handheld, temporal thermometers in all nurses' offices. Obviously, if a student feels ill, we'll have the ability to take temperatures, but taking all students' temperatures as they enter the building, which was first talked about as a possible part of the guidance, is not part of the fall guidance at this time. Again, and all, as we know, as we've moved through this since March the 12th, all this is subject to change as we move through the summer, depending on number of cases, depending on CDC and local Board of Health guidelines. These things can all, is obviously, as you know, subject to change as we get closer to September 1st.
Do we know, or are we able to, I don't know, when we reopen, let's say that someone in a kid's household comes down with COVID, I don't even know if we're allowed legally to be aware of that, so that we could potentially address that. I mean, do you, if someone in their household gets COVID, do you send them home so they're not potentially bringing it to school? Like, is there guidance on this? Do we know if the district's even able to receive that information? What do we know about that aspect of it? Anything?
Receiving the information is obviously, I think it has to come, from the Board of Health, and if it's not offered by the family. But again, this will be something that has to be in the guidance and in the addendum to the handbook. And also will be led through with our attorneys, because the Department of Education is working with their attorneys, and obviously Paige Tobin and Caitlin Leach, who handle our handbook, obviously will be in line with whatever the guidelines, suggest, and obviously what local Board of Health and obviously HIPAA, allow us to get, so this is all questions that are still open.
Okay. So
Mr. Vice Chairman, if I could.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
So tomorrow I have a regular Wednesday 9 a.m. department head meeting. Dr. Jim Cobbs joins on behalf of the superintendent. Dr. Rick Herman, the MD, that's our pandemic consultant, and Linda Cahill, Doctor of Nursing, that heads up Board of Health, is on that call. So we'll ask that question tomorrow. Dr. Herman and Linda are also doing town hall Q&A this week for city employees, as we start to think about reopening City Hall and the like. So fair question, Mr. Vice Chairman, and we'll ask that of the Board of Health and the doctor tomorrow to get some guidance, but I think the superintendent was right in terms of the HIPAA. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And I thought of HIPAA too. I just feel like we're just asking for trouble if we don't know, but yeah, if you can let us know, that'd be great. I appreciate it. It's a tough question with the privacy laws and such as well. And so, okay. All right. And Superintendent Thomas, we have PPE for reopening. I know we kind of started to talk about that.
Yeah, so Aldo has worked closely with Dr. Cobbs, Ken Thompson. So now that we know what is, the initial guidance is required, we are purchasing the masks for students, cloth masks, also for teachers. We'll also have, and also they're welcome to wear their own, but we're going to make sure we supply every student and teacher with cloth masks, and we'll also have we're ordering several 1,000 paper masks as backup. Obviously, when a student forgets their mask, we'll be able to have replacement paper masks ready for them. So that's all being ordered again, and we'll be charging that back to Plymouth County. We're also looking into the clear face shields because the guidance is clear in the Department of Education guidance that students with disabilities that need verbal cues, and also students that are deaf, then they need to make sure that they can see the teacher, see that read lips, those kind of things. So that's required under special ed guidance. And also our bilingual students that are learning English. It's important that we have the option for teachers to have a clear face shield. So obviously where verbal cues are important, so that those we'll be buying several of those as well to have for teachers as that option. And some of them will be required under the special education laws. So those are pretty much the, gloves. We're buying gloves. Obviously, the hand sanitizer needed for all classrooms and common areas. The electrostatic disinfectant guns that we're buying to obviously disinfect large areas. Those are all being purchased or have been purchased, again, being charged back to the county. So again, all this we should have and be ready to go for September 1st.
Any other questions on or comments on this matter? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Attorney Spatafor is with us to present to us policy JFA, caregiver authorization. Sarah, if you want to, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. So it's actually a little bit of a different, so I'm going to be suggesting that you remove policy JFA, caregiver authorization, and I'm suggesting an amendment to policy JF, which I think was included in your Friday packet. So policy JF is the school admissions policy. Policy JFA is the caregiver authorization policy. So taking policy JF first, there's only really one very minor change here, and it's, again, I updated it in accordance with the MASC model policy, and then made one additional change, which was to remove the requirement of a birth certificate Right now, it had previously required a birth certificate. The language here just requires evidence of age. And this is to address situations where potentially homeless students, displaced students, immigrant students may not have access to their birth certificate. So it's again to take down a barrier for admissions for students who may be in challenging circumstances. You still have the right to request documentation of age, which is obviously important when placing the student and enrolling them, but it just takes out that one requirement of a birth certificate. So that's the revisions to policy JF. And with regard to policy JFA, which is the caregiver authorization, that policy is a little bit out of date. The MASC doesn't require it anymore. And the reason being is that a caregiver authorization is a document that you can still use. It's a document that allows a parent to designate educational and medical decision-making authority to another individual for their child. And it's commonly used in situations for educational purposes when a student's living with another family member for a whole host of reasons. Your policy required it for enrollment, which is not technically appropriate under the current law. The enrollment laws are constantly changing, but right now the standard is you need to enroll as long as the student meets the age, residency, and then vaccination requirements, which again, the vaccination requirements can be waived depending on circumstances. As long as the student meets that, they should be enrolled. And then the question of decision-making can be addressed by the district staff and the building staff if there's going to be somebody other than the biological parents or the custodial parents making those decisions regarding the student. We can use caregiver authorization or a host of other tools available to the district for that type of situation. So again, I'm suggesting you remove that policy because the language isn't technically legal anymore. But I've talked to Marcia, we've talked about how you can still use a caregiver authorization, just not as a bar to enrollment.
Okay. What types of, you said we can still require means to prove age? What, without a birth certificate, what would be legal forms of age verification we could require?
Sure, so it could be passport, visas, additional documents could be hospital records, other medical records that show a date of birth. Those are the ones that I see most commonly. So those are what's coming to the top of my head. 9 times out of 10, it's a birth certificate. Probably 9.9 times out of 10, it's a birth certificate. It's in the very rare circumstances where they're not able to locate it due to being displaced or some other major catastrophic situation usually. And those other documents can be substituted as long as we can verify them and they seem to be from a third party, not something the family submitted that they wrote on their own, then it's usually justifiable for the district to use.
Well, and that's why I kind of was asking if you know, you mentioned a homeless student. Well, they're not going to have a passport most likely, you know, so there's some of the other documentation that they're unlikely to have. I mean, they may, you know, so I guess I just want to, you know what we could potentially get. And I know Marcia has her hand up too to comment.
Hi there. My comment, I was just going to add that the certificate of live birth from the hospital, that once a child is born, they get one of those. So sometimes the parents don't have the original birth certificate available to them, but they may have the certificate of live birth, which does give the information that we're looking for, which is in fact the age and who the parents are, to confirm that they're eligible to do the enrollment.
Okay. All right. And are those fairly easier to obtain than maybe a birth certificate might be? Is that why that could potentially be useful?
Right. The policy for Brockton was an original birth certificate, and there's a fee associated with that at the City Hall. And sometimes that fee is out of reach for some of our families.
Okay, makes sense. Like I said, I just wanted to kind of vet that a little bit about how we might verify age short of a birth certificate. So, all right, any other comment or question from anybody on the committee? All right. So Sarah, do we need two motions basically to remove JFA and then add JF? Is that correct?
Revise JF, yep.
Revise JF and remove JFA.
Mhm.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to make that motion, maybe to start with removing JF
Remove JFA.
or JFA, I'm sorry.
I'll make a motion to remove items JFA from our policy manual.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor properly seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll go ahead with a roll call vote. Mayor Sullivan.
Yes.
All right, D'Agostino, yes. Ms. Asax, not present. Mrs. Mendez.
Yes.
Mr. Minicheillo.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Motion carries. And then we need one to revise JF, is that correct?
Motion to revise items JF in our policy handbook.
Second.
All right, motion on the floor properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Mayor Sullivan.
Yes.
All right. D'Agostino is a yes. Asax not present. Mrs. Mendez.
Yes.
Mr. Minicheillo.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. All right, if we have nothing else on item 4 of the agenda, then we will move to other business. I do have 2 items of other business that I'd like to bring before the committee. The first one, I did reach out to all of you about moving back to live in-person meetings. I sent you all pictures of the setup at the Little Theater. I don't know that we necessarily, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that we necessarily need a specific vote. I don't think we took a specific vote to go into the Zoom mode. I think I just kind of did a straw poll over the phone, called each of you. But I do want to, while we have us together, is everybody comfortable with what you saw and going back to the Little Theater based on the distancing and everything that they saw? I mean, is there any objection?
None.
Any questions about the setup? All right. I
I
will
had one.
go ahead.
What would the custodians clean the room after we leave?
Absolutely. Yes.
Sterile.
Yep. They will go in, they'll do a full cleaning with the guns and the sanitizing and all of that. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things the superintendent and I, we walked around and talked about spacing in the audience. In case we had guests coming to speak, hearing visitors coming to speak, how would we handle that? That's the podium in one of the pictures. You can see the podium off in the background. That was addressing that. We kind of walked out and figured out how many seats we'd have to block to keep the proper distance. We'd block a row in between. So we did map all of that out just kind of in our heads, Mike and I. And so after a meeting, not only would they clean the space that we're sitting, but they would also go through and disinfect that area where where potential guests or audience might be.
When would it take effect?
July 1st, I think we would make this our last Zoom meeting unless there's, an objection. We could make this our last Zoom meeting and, we don't have a full meeting until July 21st, but we could certainly use that space for any subcommittee meetings that come up as we move forward into July.
Would attendees be required to wear masks?
Yeah, I would say so. Yes. Yes, I
So
think we have.
Then there'd have to be proper signage, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. Mike, is that something we can make sure
Yeah,
we get proper signage?
Yes, we've ordered our signage from Sign Design, not only for playgrounds and fields. We're also audited for the interior of the building, so we'll make sure that the signs are put up as people enter the fine arts exterior entrance, but we'll also have signs inside as well. As they come down the hallway to enter the little theater, there'll be more signs there about social distancing and the use of a mask.
So it will be required. That's our,
Yes.
that's going to be our policy. So members of the public who come in to speak or just be in attendance they all have to wear masks, correct? That's
Correct.
going to be the policy. Okay, just check.
Yep. And Mike, would we be able to, Tim, I see you, we'll have a janitorial staff person there to make sure, like during the budget hearings, if you noticed in the council chambers, every time someone spoke, there was a gentleman that came and wiped down the podium. And so we would have somebody on staff to be able to make sure that they could do that. Perfect.
Yeah, the custodian in the fine arts building stays nights during the summer, so he is there. And if for some reason he's on vacation, there'll be a replacement. So a custodian will be assigned to be there and stay there and wipe down the podium and the microphone, disinfect that after each speaker.
Okay. All right, Mr. Sullivan.
This is for the superintendent. My key fobs don't work anymore. They're gonna have to
Oh,
be updated.
they should be. They weren't disabled. So I know Mr. DiAugustino got in the other day. Are you having issues with yours?
It doesn't work.
Okay, then I'll have to I'll have them check it, and then if need be, I'll have them issue you a new one.
I was told that everybody's was shut off, Mike.
No, to go through and disarm everybody's fob, it would have had to be all 3,000 employees. So we didn't we locked down the system so people couldn't come in and out of buildings, but the fobs weren't we didn't disable fobs. We changed the settings on the actual door, but we didn't so your fob should be working now, but though that's been changed back. So you can give it a try and let me know.
Okay.
And Mr. Sullivan, if I assume you tried to go in and kind of look at the setup, if you'd like, I'd be happy to meet you over there tomorrow, and because my fob was working as of yesterday.
No, I meant, I tried it at Central and I tried it at the Raymond School today. It didn't work.
Okay, I didn't know if you tried to go in and look around in the little theater at the
No,
setup.
no.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right.
I'll
The
have them
meeting
check
at City Hall.
I'll have them check your fob tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. Any other concerns? And if you guys think of stuff as we get closer to, actually having a meeting there, I mean, just, if you have a concern that pops into your head, just make it known so we can address it, so that we can make sure that we've thought of everything and we can do this in a safe way, but also, give the public what I think we all saw them asking the city council for. And that's the thing we saw, the public was definitely made it known what they were looking for. And that's why, the superintendent and I started to say, hey, maybe it's time for us to go back to in-person meetings as well. So any other comment, or is everybody good?
You're gonna put us back in suit and ties.
Yeah, I know. The budget hearing's probably the first time I've put a suit and tie on in 3 months. The golf shirts are much more comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. The other thing I wanted to bring up, I had reached out to the committee for a potential retreat date. Seems like the general consensus, the majority wanted to go with the 16th, Thursday, the 16th of July. So that is the plan. Melinda will be working with Mike, and we'll be putting together the agenda. And time-wise, though, do we want to, is 5 too early? Do we want to go earlier? I mean, just think that our retreats are typically potentially 3 to 4 hours in length.
I'd like to go earlier if we could. I got a meeting at 7 o'clock, Mark.
You do?
Another meeting.
Right. And so you can obviously come for as much of it as you can.
Yeah.
I mean, is 4 too early for people?
Oh, 4 is good.
4 works for me.
Would anybody object to 4 o'clock at the high school? No? All right, seems like we can do 4 for the retreat on the 16th, Thursday, the 16th then. All right. That's
That's at
all
the
I
high
had
school?
under, yes, yep.
High school, okay.
Yeah, a retreat, given the casual format of a retreat, I think that'd be pretty difficult to do in this format. So I'm glad we're able to go back to the high school for it. But okay, any other comments? Anything else under new business from anybody else?
Mark, the retreat usually goes for about 3 hours, is it? 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. you said?
Yeah, I'd plan 4 to 8.
Okay.
They've usually, hey, Mike, we've had some that went 5, okay? The retreat that never ended. Go ahead.
So what I'll do is I'll have Melinda on Thursday email draft agenda. And then obviously, please feel free to email her back or call her with any other things you want to see on that agenda. But we definitely we'll be talking about the reopening plan. And there'll be a presentation from some of the members of the reopening committee. So we obviously talk about that, the reopening guidance. We could have updated guidance on transportation and extracurricular and sports at that, by that meeting. I don't know. We'll obviously diversity and inclusion will also be on that agenda. So we'll obviously have that on there. And then there was one other thing we talked about at the executive team today that is escaping me, but we'll email out a draft agenda, and obviously members can as always, feel free to call Melinda or send back whatever you want to see on that agenda.
Okay. All right. If once again, any other new business to come
I
before the
had
committee? Go ahead.
just a quick note to the Juneteenth may become a holiday, rightfully so, obviously. I expect that will become a holiday. I think it passed one of the bodies unanimously. I think this week, I'm not 100% sure, but I think within probably the next month, you'll see that as a recognized holiday. June 19th in 2021 falls on a Saturday. So we'll have to see if the state decides to celebrate that holiday on either the Friday before or the Monday after. If it's the Friday before, we would have to come back and revisit our calendar, because that, without any snow days, that the June 18th is scheduled to be the last day of school. So we'll just have to note that in the calendar once Juneteenth becomes a holiday, and obviously that's June 19th. We'll just have to adjust our calendar as that comes out and is made law. I just wanted to make sure that that will have to be obviously kept on our radar, and we'll have to take that vote once the state makes that an official holiday.
Sounds good. All right.
Mr. Vice Chairman, if I could, I just want to take this
ahead.
moment to kind of piggyback on what you said. I want to thank all the school committee members that attended the City Hall budget hearings last week. I know certain people wanted to be there, they couldn't because of other obligations, but at the end of the day, I want to thank the school committee and the superintendent and all the Petronio, Mike and Aldo and Troy Clarkson and I worked, 16, 17 weeks. I want to thank the BEA and Kim Gibson's leadership as well. So tomorrow starts the new fiscal year. We have a budget. It was a 9-2 vote. I want to thank the city council for their support on that. And at the end of the day, we'll see again what numbers actually come from Beacon Hill. I was on a Zoom just last night with U.S. Senator Ed Markey as well. So we'll see what kind of Fed money comes out as well. So again, I just want to thank all the local elected officials for their endeavors as we move forward to better the city of Brockton. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Okay, any other business before we adjourn? All right, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And seconded. All right, so we have a motion to adjourn, seconded. I'll call the roll. Mayor Sullivan.
Yes.
Okay, D'Agostino, yes. Mendez,
Yes.
Minicheillo,
Yes.
Rodriguez.
Yes, and happy anniversary, Cynthia.
Oh, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Thanks.
Mrs. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight.